Hi, how's everybody doing? I know I'm standing between you and dinner, so I appreciate everybody being here. If you're interested in coming in, please come on in. I'm really excited to be talking to you today about responsible AI. So I just want to give you a quick sense of the setup for today. So I want to give a quick overview of some of the things that we've done at Google, and then we actually have two different conversations that we're going to have. So Eva's going to come up and moderate a panel with some customers and partners, and then we're going to come back and have another conversation. So we've got a lot of exciting things to talk about today, and of course we really want your feedback. So please, if you don't already have the app, please download it and give us your feedback, because we always really want to make sure we are improving. So when you sort of step back and think about where we are with AI today, it really feels like, and I think we can all probably attest to at this point, that we're in the midst of what many people feel like is a second machine age. And this has really been characterized by massive advances in compute and things like artificial intelligence. When you look at what this means in practice, so there are actually over 90 machine learning papers that are published every single day. This is now outpacing Moore's Law. So the amount of innovation that we've had over a relatively short period of time is quite dramatic. So much so, as an example, if you think about computer vision in 2011 had a 26% error rate. Humans had about a 5% error rate. In 5 years, by 2016, computer vision had about a 3% error rate. That's an incredible amount of change in such a short period of time, which really leads to the space where we are today. This change has been transformative for Google. When I started at Google about 9 years ago, we never heard the words machine learning. It wasn't a thing that was talked about. But you can look at now the number of products who are built on machine learning at Google has just skyrocketed, and this will continue to happen. And this is a transformation that we've undergone, that we are now also working with a number of you as you are undergoing the same kinds of transformations for yourselves. There are a tremendous number of examples of where AI can be incredibly beneficial for the world. One of my favorite examples is this one in the upper middle. These are some very rural farmers in Japan who use the TensorFlow model to sort cucumbers on their little mini production line inside their greenhouse. We've been able to build models that can find manatees from very high heights from aerial photographs. And when you look at those pictures, there's no way that a human eye would be able to identify what a manatee is, but a machine learning model can, which can help tremendously with things like endangered species. And there are places where we've seen AI can really help to create more fairness in the world. So this was work that we did jointly with the Gina Davis Institute on media and gender, and we took all of the films released in 2015, 200 films, and analyzed them for both screen time and speaking time. And you can see the results, which are fascinating. So in 2015, women-led films made 16% more in the box office. And yet, men were both seen and heard twice as much on screen as women were. That's, if you think about what could have been made by the media industry if there had been better balance, this is not only about creating examples and opportunities for young girls and women to look at and see themselves on screen, but it's also very much about the bottom line for an organization. And you can start to see places where those kinds of biases are really pervasive in ways that we might not appreciate and understand. So this was a fascinating study done of 3 million English words from public news sites. And it was set up on these he, she analogy statements. So if I said to you, king is to man as queen is to, you would expect woman. Or if I said, Paris is to France as Tokyo is to, you would expect the answer to be Japan. And you can measure the distance between words and then create that same analogies, and it comes up with things like she is to registered nurse as he is to physician. Perhaps that's not a surprising bias that we know exists in society, but some of these are quite surprising. She is to cupcakes as he is to pizza. She is to interior designer as he is to architect. And this is all based on just distance between words. These are things that are pervasive across all of society as we know it today, and machine learning can both help bring that to the light and, if not done carefully and responsibly, can help propagate these biases in unintended ways. For that reason, we really believe in cloud AI, that all of our efforts around responsible AI are part and parcel with the way we think about what is going to be successful for AI. It's critically important that all organizations be thinking about what does it mean to deploy AI, how do I think about all of the possible impacts of the work that I'm doing. Because the reality is, if organizations don't think about that, the potential for trust to be broken can really stop the progress and stop the benefits of AI from being realized around the world. And that would be a terrible outcome because the benefits are so big and so powerful. We all really want to make sure that that is experienced in the world. So within Google, we've done a couple of things about this. The first is we wrote AI principles that stretch across the entirety of Google. And these are 7 things that we believe AI should do and 4 things that we said we would not directly pursue. But as you can see, these are quite broad. It would be hard to make decisions as a product area when you're evaluating an individual product or an individual use of a product just based on this. Because what does it mean to be socially beneficial? How do you measure that? How do you know you're not propagating unfair bias? Is that even possible to fully achieve if there's no real definition of what that might mean? And so in order to support these principles, we put into practice 2 processes within cloud that help us operationalize those. The first is we evaluate our customer engagements that are using our machine learning tools that we've created and look for how those engagements will align with those AI principles. The second is that we evaluate every product that we build in a really deep, robust way with a cross-functional, cross-Google group of people who come together. We're intentionally multi-level from quite junior in our organization to very senior. We pull in the relevant stakeholders, we pull in external voices, we pull in folks from the human rights community, civil rights community, to make sure that we're continually opening our frame of reference and evaluating each product in a unique way so that we are doing everything we can to ensure that we are aligning with our own principles. It's important to us that this process is rigorous, that it's engaging. It's actually, I can say in my 9 years at Google, it's the most inspiring thing that I personally take part in. Those conversations, while sometimes really challenging, I always walk out of the room having learned something I didn't know before, and I find it incredibly inspiring and helpful, and they've really opened that frame of reference for our entire organization. We want them to be efficient, that's important. They have to be effective, which means that we actually put those things into practice and we can measure them to the best of our abilities. And they have to be balanced because we have to make sure that we're looking at the needs of the business as well as the responsibility. We've launched a few things today that I want to touch on briefly because there are really exciting efforts to help organizations with this. The first is around explainable AI, and this gives the human observer insights into why a model behaves the way it does. It can help really create information around what were the factors that led to a particular outcome and in what proportion. This information is really hard to find today. It's a way of building trust with explainable AI because it's important to design interpretable AI and then to be able to deploy it with confidence. This is incredibly challenging when you don't know exactly both how a model was built and how it's making those decisions. And you have to think across that whole range of stakeholders all the way out to the business user or consumer who is going to be on the other side of that model to help them understand as well. This can explain why an individual data point received a prediction, can help creators debug that model, can help refine it, verify that the behavior is acceptable, and then can help with a general understanding of that model. We're really excited about this. I hope everybody gets a chance to try these tools. They're a part of our AI platform. It gives analysis with every prediction. You can choose an explanation method. We've also integrated this with our what if tool for model inspection that can help you test, well, what if I looked like this? What if I try this way? What if I take on this persona, and give you more information that way. The second thing that we've released are something called model cards. This is built off of research that we released last January, and it's a proposed framework for better understanding how AI performs. They're short documents that accompany trained machine learning models, and we've released 2 for components of our Vision API, both face detection and object detection. Our goal with these first model cards is to provide practical information about their performance and their limitations in order to help developers make better decisions about what models to use in what context. This is a really exciting area for us. Not all model cards will look the same. We have these 2 available today. We're looking at how we might create more for other parts of our technology as well as where this will go in the future. You can think of these like nutrition labels for machine learning. And they have incredible potential to help address issues of fairness and bias, along with just general explainability and transparency. And we're really excited about this. We often talk about how technology is most powerful when everyone can use it. And really, at the end of the day, it even goes beyond that, because really when technology is most powerful is when everyone can benefit from it, and that's what we're aiming to do with our cloud AI products. I wanted to give you that short overview as a setup to the conversations that are going to happen, and with that I'd like to invite Eva and Sims and Ulli and Andreas up to the stage to have a conversation.
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eva Dura, and I'm Product Ops Lead for Cloud Artificial Intelligence in California. And I have a pleasure to welcome our guests. Over the past years, within Google, I have worked with numerous partners and clients in deploying and fostering the adoption of AI in business context, and everything that Tracy talked about on responsible AI, I think that wouldn't be possible without our partners and clients. So that's why we invited some of them today to our panel to share their experience with working with us and with our clients. So welcoming Sims, who is the program manager at the DeepMind. She has dedicated her career to the beneficial use of artificial intelligence, and thinks that this is the key to enable the next generation of knowledge for the humanity. Then we have Ulli Waltinger, who is Machine Intelligence Research Group Head of Siemens AI Lab. He has deployed numerous projects with Siemens on deep learning and artificial intelligence, and in 2017 funded the Siemens AI Lab in Munich. Welcome, thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Andreas Liebl, who is a managing director of Unternehmertum and co-founder of Applied AI Initiative in Munich that fosters and enables the application and adoption of AI with industry, governments, and startup ecosystem. So thank you very much for joining that session. I will maybe kick off with a simple question. In your organizations, what is the role of AI, and how beneficial that is, and in the context of responsible AI, how are you deploying that? So ladies first, maybe.
All right, I'll go first. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. So DeepMind is a research organization. Our mission is to solve intelligence and then use that intelligence to make the world a better place. So we have teams devoted to core research, science, engineering, ethics and society, applied artificial intelligence, as well as an amazing operational structure to kind of help all of those teams work efficiently together. And we also take part in many partnerships and collaborations across the industry. My team specifically works on the application of machine learning and AI to challenges in the energy sector that contribute to climate change. So we have right now 2 projects, one of which is working and operational in Google data centers that is improving energy efficiency right now by about 30%. And another project that is running on Google contracted wind farms that we are seeing about a 20% improvement in the value of wind power, which we think is really important to making it more competitive with fossil fuels on energy grids. So the luck of my team is that our success translates into carbon reduction, which I think is really important.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I think that's an excellent start for the use of AI, continuing with Siemens.
Yeah, so hi everybody. I work for one of the oldest German startups, I would say, which happened to scaled up to 380,000 people in the world, where we obviously have a multitude of sub-companies and domains we are in mobility, in healthcare, in the energy sector, in grid space, in energy management space, in marvelous application areas where digital technologies have a vital impact. With that, we undergo a huge, what is called a transformation. You may have heard that through the entire day, or maybe for a certain aspect, where we see how and what is the role of a meaningful impact with AI technology, enabling our transition through the journey. It happened to be that our management board decided, and we're very happy to see that AI is so-called company core technology, and with that, it's seen as the vital backbone of the transformation of Siemens. We are organized in, and we're funded from top down, and with that, my team focusing on applied research in AI, machine learning and deep learning research, together with partners and the ecosystems, at the same time making a difference in individual products, whether it's in mobility, whether it's in computer vision on healthcare, or whether it's the internal processes. And with that, our lots team applies research, contributes to the open source movement, but also wants to make a difference with a movement towards responsible industrial AI.
Thank you. And Andreas, you have been bridging actually between industry, working with numerous corporations, governments, and the startup environment. What is the AI role is playing AI in those corporations, and where do you see the biggest impact?
Yeah. So from what we see in German industry, but also European and worldwide, is that there are 2-3 streams. So one is that the companies really need to think about, or are thinking about, what AI will mean for them to differentiate themselves against competition. So that's really at the core of what they're doing, and that's mainly research driven right now. So we don't talk about applications here, but we talk about industrial AI use cases and really how this will make a change for their core business. And then we see AI applications in support functions and functions quite a bit in sales support, in customer service, and like virtual assistants, but also predictive maintenance. Like these are areas where there are products out on the market, and companies are can readily apply it internally as a product and as a service from someone else. That's helpful for scaling it, while for the topics they do for themselves, it's really, really challenging for them to get it to a global scale. But that is mainly research on their core functions.
You mentioned challenges. Exactly. The application of AI is challenging. What are the challenges that you are particularly seeing that in the context of responsible AI and explainable AI, interpretable AI? Maybe just continuing since you just started.
Yeah. So what we see is, or what why we started is actually AI is not a technology topic if it comes to adoption of AI in society and industry. It's a culture topic, it's a trust topic, it's a transformation topic for like really every one of us. So this explainable topic is so important if it really comes to adoption at scale in companies. So there's so much time spent on explaining people to really use these tools and to accept using these tools, liability issues, competence and capability issues. So all these like very human topics, like when it comes to interaction between AI and humans, that's the most challenging part in companies, and that like keeps them away from really scaling it inside the companies. Like it's very easy to have it as a small prototype, but when it comes to real adoption of the cases, it's a trust topic and a like acceptance topic for the employees.
Yeah. And Ulli is nodding already, and I know we've talked a lot and interacted a lot on that topic of explainable AI.
We need to differentiate between industrialization, which was always about gaining efficiency and productivity, and the consumer space, which in current times pushes hard on attention and predictable behavior. Let's say personalization, right? Yeah. The main idea of AI is turning input into an action in the real world, right? And this action in the real world have failure modes. We know that, we can measure them. Accuracy, precision, recall, right? Yeah. So if we can measure them and we know they have failure modes, how do we make sure that these systems that we deploy on a large scale nowadays reflect those kinds of values that we represent and want to represent as an ecosystem, as a company, or as an individual person? And this is somehow really tricky. It's not a bad thing. It's really tricky because if you're in a domain, for you, it's clear, some process, some application, some maybe
and
also...
even that, it's not that clear. If the black box is the input and the output and the black box is in the middle, how do you explain the model?
Yeah, and that we know that, we all have failure modes and we all have blind spots, and so have algorithms, right? And we know from the innovation drivers and the excellence that diversity in terms of people, domains, and broad set, being more inclusive to that helps not only pushing innovation, but also reducing bias in these kinds of algorithm steps. And that is why it's so important to open a discourse on responsibility and the position on bias, on fairness, in a broad set, not only on techniques, because AI has such a vital part in our life cycle on the products, so it's not only about training models, but deploying, how to update, how to organize, how to impact that. And that's a tricky question. And that's why, you have to be more inclusive and you have to be more cautious about the entire life cycle of machine learning flows, right?
Yeah. And Siemens is nodding and being at the front.
Absolutely agree with you on.
Mind, I think you know that best.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your points on diversity and inclusion. I also think a really important aspect of responsibility is reliability. And for AI, obviously, the recommendations and the output that you're going to get is only as good as the data that you're putting in. And one of the things that we've seen in the application of AI in the real world is that the real world's data is quite messy. So it takes a lot of time to clean that data and actually even get it ready for training. And so one of the things that we can do to address this challenge, like data quality and data quantity, is actually doing this pre-work, ahead of time, having conversations about standards. And there's some folks in the UK who are doing excellent work on this in the energy sector specifically, EDT, for Energy Data Task Force. For anyone who's in the energy sector and is interested, their recent report in July was fantastic. But I think it's a really good example, regardless of focus on energy industry or any vertical really, that this discourse needs to be happening more and more often. So that's kind of how we're thinking about addressing those challenges.
Even going beyond the UK, I know Andreas has been engaging with the policymakers and on regulation on how to make the governance structure adaptable to the changes that we are now encountering in responsible AI. Can you comment on that a bit?
Yeah, so if you talk about responsible AI from a national, international perspective, you need to look at this whole topic a bit differently. And the one thing is, where are companies intrinsically motivated to work on their own. And the whole trust part, the whole transparency part is something they want to work on. Like there are legal reasons for that. You need, like in insurance, in banking, it's auditability, so you need to be transparent on that. What we saw before is for testing purposes, to making it more robust, but also to gain the trust of your customers. Ultimately, you need to be transparent and explainable of what you're doing. So that's something, from my perspective, where we need maybe some push from the government or policymakers, but overall it's a topic where companies really push this forward. And then we have topics, we talked about fairness, or we heard about fairness before, and fairness is a very interesting topic because it's a cultural topic. So what is fair? Is it fair to give a loan to someone who has the highest likelihood to pay it back? That would motivate us to have very individual solutions. And maybe each person gets what he deserves, but is it from a societal perspective, is it something that we want, or should everyone get the same loan to the same conditions to make it as a fair condition to everyone? And that's a cultural topic, and there is no clear answer to very individualistic societies or societies with a larger social sense, a community sense, and that to give directions in that way is a policy topic, because it is impossible for each companies to decide on their own, to find the reasoning on their own. It needs to be, there need to be at least clear guidelines in which direction you should go in one way or the other. Same for liability issues, and the whole responsibility in a legal sense. Also there, we need to have certain standards and structures which are given in a way that we can work with these types of structures. So we have these two aspects of responsible AI that ultimately helps us all to be better and to really use these types of systems. Yeah, but we need these both sides of things.
Yeah.
The policymakers, for them it's really hard because we suddenly start a discussion which we implicitly had for the last 20, 30, 40, 100 years. We had these topics of fairness, and this was a personal decision made by one person, by a judge, saying this person is more likely to commit more crimes, and therefore it's more likely to arrest this person with a specific background in race or gender or whatever. And now we have this data-driven, and that gives us more responsibility in doing that. So suddenly we get these discussions, which we should have had a couple of years, couple of decades ago, but now with full force we need to answer them because we have the power in these systems to give us recommendations and to start answering these questions.
Yeah, and that's exactly where our next panelists will touch upon on exactly those topics, but I want to finish a bit. You touched already about the past, present. What is about the future, and what are the recommendations you would give as panelists and experienced in responsible AI and explainable AI to that audience that sits here from Siemens, from DeepMind, from applied AI perspective, and then we hand over to the next panelist.
Yeah.
So from our side, we're currently working on a framework. It's called Siemens Responsible AI, Industrial Responsible AI. It has mainly three pillars. One is, you mentioned already, policy making. So what kind of best practice and guidelines are there if you access the capability of AI? We differentiate between three impact factors. One is the transparent world, about profiling, about computer vision technologies, about sensing the world. The second is about human augmentation, tools that help somehow our customers, but as well as our employees, to improve on certain tasks and help in the complexity of the world. And the third is about autonomous aspects, how we ship more autonomy in our machines, in controllers, in robotic systems. With that, capabilities that we have also risk and responsibilities come ahead. And for that, we believe that the policy making on the governmental level is sometimes a bit handing off in times, behind there, and therefore we want to focus on guidelines and best practices, how to use it. Second pillar is technology, also with partner. There's marvelous technology out there, federated learning, SafeX, robust AI, explainable AI, what if tools, you have seen it. So this is something what's quite important also to push how it's technology make an impact. And the third pillar is focusing on what we call co-creation. Trust is not necessarily about transparency, it's about interaction. And interaction means that we jointly create certain products and solutions and being aware of what kind of capabilities we're entering and what kind of niches we're getting in. With scale over people, scale over assets comes the scale of responsibility, and this needs to be reflected inside.
Yeah, and I think similar things have been engaged with Deep now, and we have been partnering on those as well.
Yeah, I think that from our perspective, one of the most important things that we have done is, and what I would recommend that anyone in this room does, is center the voices of those individuals who are impacted by the technologies that everyone's building. We've learned so much from engaging with the community on ethics and responsible AI, things like citizens' juries and even surveys, and that has been incredibly important for us in helping us understand actually how algorithmic technologies are shaping the lives of the people who use our technologies. And so I would say, please center those voices. I think that's the best piece of advice that I could give.
And I think finishing with Andreas, who has been deploying that knowledge to the industry and to the policymakers, in comment on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, if we accept that this is a topic that everyone here is responsible for and is kind of working on, sharing this information, really exchanging and getting these best practices overall, because ultimately it helps us all if we find good standards, if we find best practices here. And it's not a topic of one single company, it's a topic of us all to create general trust in AI. And it can be ruined by single companies, by single individuals, and therefore it's so much more important to work together on these topics. And I think that's the main point from my side.
Excellent, thank you very much, and that's an excellent bridge as well to our next panelist, and exactly working on those topics and applying that in real life. So I would ask Tracy to come back on stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I just want to call out something that Sim said, because I think that's so important in terms of ensuring that you're bringing in the voices of people who might be impacted by the technology, because it's important to recognize we don't necessarily have that information. Even us on this panel, we're not a representative group. And I want to recognize that about when you sort of look at this group, and so making sure that we engage in that conversation, we recognize our own limitations of our own knowledge, and that we invite that in. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kirsty Everett, who is the Compliance Chief of Staff and Head of Digital at HSBC. We're so excited that you could join us today, so thank you. And I would love to start by asking you a bit about HSBC's approach here, and in particular in terms of developing and accessing these new technologies like AI.
Thanks, Tracy. And great to be here. It's been a fantastic day. So, look, HSBC, like a lot of companies, has been thinking about how we can apply AI to improve our business, and across a really wide range of areas, from how can we improve our customer experience to how can we get better at fighting financial crime. And as we go on that journey, we keep coming back to that underlying principle of it really isn't around whether we can do something, whether it's legal. It's really for us about whether we should do it. Where does it stand from that ethical perspective? How does it stack up? And I think, we're almost inundated at the moment with think tanks and agencies and governments and peers releasing ideas on frameworks and what we should be thinking about. And we're taking those all on board and thinking about what it means for us. And I echo some of the comments from earlier, because this isn't a one-off tick-the-box exercise. This is an entire framework from, we have principles, but what does that mean in real life? What are the controls we put in place? What are the questions we ask ourselves? How do we check that we're making the right decisions? How do we train our staff? What governance do we put around whenever we're thinking about using these technologies? What approvals do we want to get? So it's very broad, and it's something that you can't just say, oh, ethics done, tick. It's in every single part of that journey, and every time you're thinking about using big data or AI, thinking about really what it means in every stage of the journey. Yep. And I think we look at, all the things we've already talked about today. So, a really important one for us is, how do we protect our customers' data? And what does it mean from a data privacy perspective? How do we think about explainability and transparency? Are we really sure that we understand why we're doing it and what the benefit is that we're looking for? And then lastly, around the point on fairness and unintended bias, how do we manage that? So it's not a short answer, I'm afraid.
No, well, it's not a short problem.
New technologies, new challenges. I think just being open and understanding that it's very holistic and it's not something you can tick and say, done, move on.
Yep. I can't stress that enough. I think, from our own experience and what I've seen in other journeys, it's very desirable to want to create that big list of here are all the things that are fine and here are all the things that are not fine. And at the end of the day, that list, it's not possible to create. And that can be a hard realization for an organization to have, that it's actually much more complex. But at the end of the day, that leads to much better outcomes. And it isn't something that you tack on at the end that won't lead to success. It's something that you have to think about at the beginning and at every stage. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more, as an organization like HSBC with the global footprint that HSBC has, what forms, what kinds of issues around unfair bias in particular do you feel like you spend the most time thinking about, if there's anything you could tease out?
Yeah, I mean, unfair or unintended bias, we pretty much don't like any of them, so...
Fair.
That's fair. We don't have a favorite. It's for us, we are obviously a customer-driven organization, and we need that trust with our customers, and we're accountable to them. So, we do spend a lot of time thinking about this, and we are conscious that we may have bias in our existing, data sets, which can then lead to us encoding bias into some of these solutions that we're looking at. So we really do kind of challenge ourselves, and the point around, think about the data that you're starting with. Don't just think about how you may bring it in through the journey is key. But you're right. I think as a global organization, we have customers and staff all over the world, and they have different characteristics, different perspectives, different experiences, and one of our main corporate values is diversity and inclusion. So anything that puts that at risk, anything that starts to suggest that we may be looking at bias in that space is a big problem.
It's a complex challenge for sure. So we think a lot about explainability. I know you do. It's top of mind for many, particularly as AI systems start to be more commonly deployed. So can you talk a little bit about what that means for HSBC in particular, and how you would describe the needs of the bank with regards to explainable AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andreas said it earlier. Financial institutions and banks, it's absolutely key. We're accountable to our customers, and any time we make a decision or there's an outcome that impacts them, we have to be able to explain that. It's pretty black and white. Having said that, I think there's always a balance, right? So, you know, as banks, we're used to thinking about things on a balance of we take risk, what is the risk offset here? And I think when it comes to explainability, quite often we see there's an offset between performance and explainability, and that's really interesting for us. Because then you're back into the ethics of where on that line should we be. And there's some situations, you know, I'll use a non-banking example, but if you had a life-threatening disease and I said to you, well, I can give you an AI treatment, but I've got no idea why or how it works, but I guarantee it will save you, you would probably say, okay, I'm going to take it. You know, we don't deal with things quite like that, but there is that balance around how much do we need to be able to explain? Do we need to be able to explain every single point along the model, or do we need to just be able to explain the key drivers for an outcome or a decision that we've made? You know, if we've turned you down for a bank account, you deserve the right to know why. So it's not just about what we think is appropriate from an explainability perspective, but it's also what we think our customers will think is appropriate and what our regulators will think. So it is very key for us.
One of the things that you know, I've been thinking about a lot in this area is we often talk about the creation of AI from beginning all the way out through deployment as a team sport, because there are so many different roles and functions that need to participate in that as you move from creation and development all the way out through deployment into an application or into a workflow and into then the impact of that out in the world. And I think explainability needs to also be thought of along that scale, because it is important to think about what kind of information is actually useful or helpful to the different stakeholders who are impacted or have to understand a model, because it isn't the same. What a data scientist needs in terms of understanding while they're building is not the same as what a doctor would need in terms of understanding, does this eye scan for diabetic retinopathy, how did it make that decision? What factors led to that? And that's very different information.
Yeah, and that's the same for us. You know, our data scientists need one thing, as you say, but our frontline staff that need to have a conversation with the customer and say, this is your credit decision, or you know, you've had a payment stopped for financial crime purposes, they need very clear black and white English. This is exactly what has happened and why.
Yep.
So we have to get to that level.
That's right, and that's about trust as well, because that trust has to be within your employees as well as with your customers.
I mean, the last thing we can have is anyone at the bank saying to a customer, or you know, I don't know, it's what the computer says.
Too bad for you.
You know, you know, we need to own the message.
Yeah. So either about explainability or anything, actually, if you could direct our engineers to do anything, what would it be? What would you need? Maybe scope it to responsible AI, but doesn't have to be.
I was off then.
Yeah.
So I'll bring it back to a business context, not just me personally. You know, I think what you were announcing earlier in terms of explainability is key, and I'm fascinated to kind of get under the bonnet a little bit, because I think if you'd asked me that question before this had come out, really that would be it. You know, how can we, I don't want to end up with an AI pyramid, but how can we use AI to help us explain AI almost?
Yes. That's how AutoML works. It's machine learning models that create machine learning models.
Building it up. So explainability is key. And then one of the other points that, you know, we've touched on a little bit today around monitoring. So, and I don't just mean after deployment, but almost through the entire spectrum of development and deployment of, you know, how do we check from an ethical perspective that we're not bringing in unintended consequences, bias, drift, that we're not, what we thought was fit for purpose and we'd gone through that process isn't moving away from where we were. So really starting to help with that, continually watching how things are evolving and moving and changing over time.
Oh, well, good. Well, I'm glad we were able to help with the first already. That's great. And I'll be excited to hear your feedback. So I want to spend the last part of our time talking about an experience that we had recently together. And as I spoke about earlier, we have this process that we use to evaluate all of our work. And we recently had what I thought was a great experience of actually doing that jointly with HSBC. And that was the first time we'd done that. And it was really exciting for us to be able to have that kind of conversation with a customer, which in many ways is a very vulnerable space to be, because having a conversation where you're really asking yourself about what could the possible intended or unintended, and in particular the unintended impacts of your work be, and having that conversation with a customer can feel a little unnerving, but it was quite exciting. So I'd love to hear from you, what did you expect when you joined that conversation, and was the outcome different from what you expected?
Yeah, it was fascinating actually. We were invited down to your office to talk about some of the work that we're partnering on and how we all thought about it from an ethics and responsibility perspective. And I'm not sure I went in with any specific expectations, but firstly it was really great for us because we work with Google on a number of projects, innovating and trying to make life better for our customers, and we do only really want to partner with people that have a similar kind of focus on responsibility and ethics in this space. So getting involved in your machine and seeing a little bit more about how you work on it was really fascinating. I think if I had to take away one point, it would be that having a number of different people who are all talking about the same project, actually coming from such different places. So, we had the bankers and then we had you guys, but then even within those teams, we had different specialisms. And what I found was the range of potential issues that we needed to think about just grew and grew and grew, more than I thought it would. And that makes it sound bad, but it was the point mentioned earlier about having diversity of thought, in this space, getting everything out on the table and then being able to say, right, now let's address it, let's think about what's serious. That was really invaluable. Yeah. And there were lots of things that came out in that debate that I don't think either of us kind of expected to see. Yeah. And so that was the one thing that I took away was, it's so key, and in your own little world, you're not necessarily going to get all the answers, and engaging different people and getting more thoughts on the table was fascinating.
Oh, that's great to hear. Truly, I think we've been doing these for well over a year and a half, and I can't think of one of those conversations where we didn't encounter new things to think about or have new ideas of how to address them in the room, and because of that group. And so for us, the experience of expanding that to have you there was really wonderful. So I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, and I thought one of our most interesting points of conversation was actually we spend a lot of time talking about unfair bias and potential pitfalls, but actually we had a great conversation about a positive.
Yep.
Because we were saying, it's not all doom and gloom. With some of the things we're working on, we may actually be able to tackle unfair bias that exists at the moment.
That's
and,
right.
and turn it around. And we were talking about that in the concept of financial inclusion. That's and right. Saying, if we can build these systems right so that we can really identify legitimate customers and legitimate customer needs, we might be able to offer products which are outside our risk tolerance at the moment. And actually, that starts dealing with a really serious issue of financial exclusion. So when you start throwing around the ideas, we hadn't necessarily thought about that from an ethical perspective. We'd just seen it as a benefit. But when you start throwing the ideas around, we were like, this is key as well. We mustn't always go down the let's always look for the cons, let's look at the pros as well. So
yeah, and I also think that's such an incredible outcome of these kinds of conversations is that you start to realize that there are ways that you can tackle these challenges that can provide incredible benefit. And the idea of being able to work with customers like at HSBC so that you can then really transform your industry is such an exciting opportunity, and it's one that we're just endlessly excited about. And I know this is something that HSBC has been thinking about for quite some time, and we've had lots of conversations, but it was really exciting for us, and hope we get to have lots more. So we are at the end of our time. I hope everybody has enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today on this incredibly important set of topics, and I hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.